Okay, here we go. What's going on, guys? I'm Jeff, the Yoshi Fanatic, and I've got to ask, do you remember Yoshi's New Island? My guess is that you've at least heard of it, and if you're familiar with the game, hearing the name probably brings back some unpleasant memories. If that's the case, I completely understand. Yoshi's New Island is arguably the black sheep of the Yoshi games, with a prevailing consensus that the art style, story, and especially the music are its major faults, and a multitude of minor problems in tow. This game has a lot of critics, and frankly, I'm one of them. To be fair though, I haven't really played Yoshi's New Island since at least 2015, which is when I first bought the game. I did 100% complete it back in the day, but my memory on the details is hazy at best. I remember having a distaste for the game overall, particularly the soundtrack, but I can't remember much else. Having been so long since I last played it, I thought it would be a good idea to replay the game again and reconsider my critical viewpoints. Was I too harsh on the game back then? Does it have merits that I didn't see or give enough credit? Is Yoshi's New Island really that bad? Let's jump right into it and find out. As soon as you turn the game on, you're greeted with this. Okay, we're not off to a good start. This has got to be one of the absolute worst first impressions of any video game I've ever played. The music is overwhelmingly childish, putting the squeak and kazoo-filled cacophony on full display. It's honestly ear-piercing and grating. What's even worse is the fact that you'll hear this horrible song every time you restart the software, and the best way to get out of listening to it is to just never close the game, or just mute the game at the title screen. Yeah, the title theme is that bad. Fortunately, things take a turn for the better after you leave the title screen. When you first start a new profile, the game introduces you to the story with an introductory cutscene similar to Yoshi's Island. The story is never really a huge aspect of any Yoshi games, but out of the whole series, the Yoshi's Island games have the most potential in terms of lore, as funny as that sounds. Yoshi's Island acted as the origin story for the Mario Brothers, and established that the Yoshi clan played an important role in their backstory. Yoshi's Island DS advanced the story, taking place sometime after Yoshi's Island, and establishing another important story beat. At the end of that game, babies Mario, Luigi, Peach, Wario, Donkey Kong, and Bowser are revealed to be the Star Children, along with one baby Yoshi. This particular Yoshi may very well be the one that we meet for the first time in Super Mario World, and the main Yoshi who's featured in the Mario spin-off games, but that's a discussion for another time. Instead of being a sequel to Yoshi's Island DS, Yoshi's New Island takes place immediately after the original Yoshi's Island. We see the stork carrying out the delivery of the baby Mario brothers to their parents after being saved by Yoshi, all the while recounting the memories of the last game. The music that plays here is even reminiscent of Yoshi's Island, being an updated version of the music box song from the intro of that game. However, when the stork lands at the mushroom-shaped house, he discovers that he delivered the babies to the wrong people. Come on, dude, you have one job! Horrified, the stork takes the babies and urgently flies away to find the right house and complete the delivery. The music even speeds up here to highlight the urgency of the situation. It almost sounds like whoever's playing the music box is spinning the crank a little too fast, which is a great touch. Unfortunately, from here the story plays out exactly the same as it did in Yoshi's Island. Kamek takes this as an opportunity to kidnap the Mario Bros again, and clashes with the stork in the sky above the ocean. He snatches Luigi from the stork, and Mario plummets toward the ocean after the skirmish. Luckily, he lands on Egg Island, a floating egg-shaped island located in the sky above the ocean, which acted as a second home to the Yoshis. He's found by the Yoshi clan, and just like in Yoshi's Island, they decide to escort Baby Mario on a quest to rescue Baby Luigi from the clutches of Kamek and Baby Bowser. One interesting difference that sets this apart from Yoshi's Island story is that Baby Bowser has taken over Egg Island, deciding that it's a perfect location for his new vacation home. I find this interesting from a potential lore perspective because it establishes that Baby Bowser already had some pre-existing beef with the Yoshi clan. If this is handled properly, this could make for some very interesting world building. But given how Mario and Yoshi games tend to go, I'm probably reading way too far into this. Anyway, with the exposition out of the way, it's time to jump into the first level. Starting with the art style, this game very clearly takes inspiration from Yoshi's Island. The backgrounds and levels themselves in particular seem to be a progression of the art style, as they stick to the same coloring book aesthetic as the other Yoshi's Island games. It's all very colorful and stylized, well, aside from a couple of the levels in World 3, where it looks like they just painted the outlines of the hills and trees and said, "Nah, screw it." Aside from that, the backgrounds and levels are quite pleasant aesthetically speaking. However, it seems that the characters got the short end of the stick in terms of art style. The characters look like clay models with a watercolor overlay, which isn't a great look in my mind, though I will say that characters like Neppy Newt do benefit from this look. In addition, their fairly low polygon count makes them look quite blocky. This is especially true for Yoshi, whose shell looks more like a spike, which cannot be a comfy seat for Baby Mario. Some characters' proportions are also off somewhat, especially Yoshi and Poochie. Yoshi's feet are laughably large, and his legs are missing entirely. And even though Yoshi's legs were also absent in Yoshi's Island, it looks more out of place in Yoshi's new island. By the way, can we acknowledge that Yoshi's Island DS is the only Yoshi's Island game that had the decency to give Yoshi legs? But I digress. Also, when Yoshi beats a boss, he and Baby Mario give the player a thumbs up, which is supposed to look like their hands are coming towards the screen, but it just looks like their hands inflate to gigantic proportions, which is hysterical. Wow, those hands. Maybe Yoshi and Baby Mario should go into boxing. Their hands are enormous. Out of all the characters, though, Poochie is the one who got duped the most. Whoa, it's Poochie! Oh. Poochie, why are you so giant? And why does your body look like that? He looks very strange in this game, and it's hard for me to really put my finger on exactly why. I think his legs are longer and skinnier than they are in the other Yoshi games, and because of the clay model and watercolor style, he looks like he doesn't have any fur, which makes him look like a hippopotamus-sized Sphinx cat. It's really not a good look for our good boy. Something else I noticed as I kept playing the game is that the characters aren't expressive in the least, as they lack any sort of bounce or life compared to the other games in the series. Like, take a look at Mild, the pink balloon enemy. He's supposed to look more bouncy and squishy, like a balloon, but in this game, he looks like a walking pink bowling ball. Pretty much all of the characters just look lifeless, and being a Mario-adjacent series, which is normally very full of character and life, it's honestly pretty jarring. One more small nitpick is that some of the characters in the background, like the white shy guys with the spiked ball and chain in the castles, are very poorly animated. Since they're more like background elements than actual characters you can interact with, they don't have to be fully 3D modeled and animated, so instead, they're just 2D pixelated sprites. This at least looks passable on the 3DS, maybe even inconspicuously similar to the rest of the characters, but upscaled in an emulator, these characters look extremely out of place. All in all though, I have to give credit where credit is due. Yoshi's new island is quite colorful, and it's definitely not an eyesore to look at or anything, and the low resolution of the 3DS cuts off some of the rough edges. But played at a higher resolution, like 960p, the problems with the art style are accentuated. Moving on to the sound design, there's nothing blatantly wrong with the sound effects in this game. The majority of them don't feel out of place, unlike in Yoshi's Island DS, where some of them felt like straight up stock sound effects. There's really nothing offensive in terms of sound effects, but there's also not that much that stuck with me. I'd say that the sound effects in this game are serviceable, but not memorable. The voice clips are also serviceable, but I wouldn't say stellar. Following Yoshi's Island DS, Yoshi retains the voice clips that were first used in Yoshi's story, which I prefer over the synthesized sounds that comprised Yoshi's voice in the original Yoshi's Island. Baby Mario retains his voice clips from the original Yoshi's Island, which most people detest. I've even heard someone compare Baby Mario to a fire alarm horn sound. I understand that sentiment, but being a father of young children, it doesn't bother me as much. Kamek seems to use his voice clips from the new Super Mario Bros. Series. Finally, Baby Bowser sounds a lot like Bowser Jr., but as far as I can tell, his voice clips aren't reused from any other games. They seem to be newly recorded. But enough beating around the bush. When you hear the words Yoshi's New Island and Sound in close succession, what you really think of is the music. So let's talk about that. I've got to be honest, when I first played the game back in 2015, I was so put off by the music that I played the whole game with the 3DS volume slider turned all the way down. So coming back to this game after so many years, and remembering the music being the main issue I had when I first played it, I really wasn't looking forward to listening to the music for the entirety of my second playthrough. But I'm glad I did, because my opinion on Yoshi's New Island soundtrack has changed quite a bit. As I mentioned earlier, the title screen music is atrocious, and it's a terrible first impression. And after the first cutscene, in the scene where the Yoshi clan finds Baby Mario, the soundtrack transitions to yet another garbage song, the infamous Yoshi clan theme. Where is that terrible noise coming from? And why are you all okay with this cacophony? This song is just terrible, and it makes me want to scrape out my eardrums with a screwdriver. The Yoshi clan theme exemplifies everything that's wrong with the Yoshi's New Island soundtrack. In particular, the instrument selection could not have been worse. The song is just laden with kazoos, other children's instruments, and squeaks, which gives the music a childish and immature sound that most of us wouldn't be caught dead listening to. So yeah, the title theme and the Yoshi clan theme are garbage to say the least. But the tragic part isn't that these songs suck, it's that they're the songs that most people associate with Yoshi's New Island. And that's a shame, because not all of the music in the game is that bad. In fact, some of the music in the game is actually pretty decent. There are even some songs that get my foot tapping, which I didn't expect coming back to this game after so many years. Yoshi's New Island follows in the footsteps of Yoshi's story, having one basic melody that gets iterated upon with different instruments, tempos, and styles. I think this works, given that the main melody itself is actually quite nice. I'd be lying to you if I told you that I don't hum the Yoshi's New Island melody from time to time. And the nice thing about this approach is that the game's soundtrack is more memorable. If you hear a Yoshi's New Island song, there's a pretty good chance that you'll think of Yoshi's New Island, though that could be a good or a bad thing, given some of the instrument selections. And I think that's actually the biggest problem with this game's music, the instrument selection. Like I said, the main melody is actually pretty pleasant, even catchy when the tempo and the style are just right. But because the songs are composed using mostly children's instruments and various squeaking noises, most of the songs end up sounding childish, even annoying in some instances. Oh no. Oh, this music. No! No, it's so bad! To get an idea of how good the main melody sounds with a better selection of instruments, there are actually some great covers of the Yoshi's New Island music that demonstrate just that. Nintendo themselves made an awesome remix of the Overworld theme in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, which seems to be a properly orchestrated rendition of the song. Honestly, it's kinda crazy to think about just how different the perception of Yoshi's New Island would be if they just chose different instruments for the soundtrack. Another issue with this game's soundtrack is that it doesn't hold a candle to the soundtrack of the original Yoshi's Island, not by a long shot. This wouldn't be as big of an issue if Yoshi's New Island wasn't so clearly a ripoff inspired by that game. But when the entire game is trying to be a callback to the original, the comparisons are inevitable, and definitely not favorable for Yoshi's New Island. The final issue I want to discuss regarding Yoshi's New Island's music isn't necessarily the music itself, as I'd say there's almost as many good tracks as there are bad ones. It's that the bad music is played at the title screen, unskippable first cutscene, at the end credits, and even at the end of every level. This game gives the player a bad first impression of the music, and then ends the game with a bad aftertaste, leaving the player on a sour note. Pun fully intended. In a way, it doesn't really matter that there are some decent and even some pretty good songs throughout the game. The things that the player is likely to remember the most are the first impression and the final note, which really is a shame in this case. Anyway, let's move on from the music. As always, the biggest factor in any game is the gameplay, and as such, there's a lot to unpack here. So let's break it down into categories, starting with the movement and controls. Before I picked up the game again, I'd remembered the movement in this game having a weird sort of inertia to it, like it took Yoshi a while to start running or stop moving. Going into the game after so long, I can say that my recollection was pretty accurate, as the weird inertia is definitely present. I think it may be in part due to the implementation of the analog stick into the control schema, which previously had only ever been a factor in Yoshi's story. It's a little different here though. Usually with an analog stick, you push the stick slightly to move slowly, and push it further to move faster. But in Yoshi's New Island, the analog controls act more like a D-pad. Any movement of the 3DS's circle pad is counted as a D-pad button press. It's either a 0 or a 1, off or on, stop or go, with nothing in between. This means that the inertia of Yoshi's movement is inherent to the game's movement itself, not in what controller you use. That said, compared to the original Yoshi's Island, the inertia isn't that much worse, and I got used to it pretty quickly. For what it's worth though, with the lack of analog in the analog controls, it's probably better to play Yoshi's New Island with the D-pad instead of the circle pad. I did find myself accidentally ground pounding more often than I care to admit while I was using the circle pad. This doesn't really happen on a D-pad, due to it being more precise overall. Frankly, the only advantage that the circle pad offers is its physical location on the 3DS itself. You'd have to reach down to the D-pad to use it, and for me, that's not a comfortable way to play the 3DS for extended periods of time. The inertia does carry over to one more aspect of Yoshi's movement, however, the egg toss. In Yoshi's Island, as soon as you press the throwing button, Yoshi immediately goes into egg throwing mode. It's snappy, responsive, and very satisfying to use. By contrast, in Yoshi's New Island, when you hit the egg throwing button, Yoshi takes nearly a whole second to wind up his egg throw, then starts the aiming process. And although the egg throwing after the initial windup is basically identical to Yoshi's Island, the delay at the beginning of the egg throw animation really throws off the feel of the entire process. It makes throwing eggs feel sluggish and unsatisfying. Interestingly though, this windup only happens when Yoshi is stationary. If Yoshi is moving when you hit the throwing button, or if you hit up on the circle pad or D-pad before hitting the throwing button, the windup animation is skipped. This is a bizarre decision on the part of the developers, as there's really no justification for it working like this. It kinda just does. That said, you should definitely implement this workaround, as just getting accustomed to using it makes the game feel a lot less sluggish. Aside from the inertia of the game though, I do have to give credit where credit is due. The rest of the movement feels pretty much on par with that of Yoshi's Island, right down to Yoshi's running speed, jump arc, flutter jump, and egg throwing. Honestly, after getting used to the inertia, Yoshi's New Island feels quite good to control. There are a few other differences when it comes to the control scheme in Yoshi's New Island compared to the original though, specifically when it comes to the egg toss. The original Yoshi's Island offers both patient and hasty egg throwing options, using the A button to start the throwing animation, optionally using the L shoulder button to lock the aim, and then the A button again to throw the egg, pressing again or releasing for the patient or hasty modes respectively. Yoshi's New Island follows suit with all of this, but it also adds the R shoulder button as an option to throw the eggs instead of the A button. This was first introduced in the Game Boy Advance remake of Yoshi's Island to account for the system having fewer face buttons compared to the Super Nintendo controller, and it's been a staple of the Yoshi series ever since. This is a great option, as using the R button instead of the A button means that you don't have to move your thumb off of the jump button to throw an egg. What's interesting though is that I've gotten so used to the Yoshi's Island approach that I typically still use the A button instinctively, even though using the R button makes more sense. Either way, it's really nice to have the option. Yoshi's New Island also added a gyroscopic aiming mode, where instead of letting the aiming reticle move on its own, you can manually aim it using the 3DS's gyroscope function. This is a really cool addition, offering more control over how you aim the egg toss. However, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, and I'm an old dog. I never got used to using this feature, but I still think it's a cool option to have. The gameplay mechanics are pretty spot on with the original Yoshi's Island. Yoshi runs and jumps with Baby Mario on his back, platforming through each stage with the goal of getting to the end. Yoshi maintains his signature flutter jump for added distance and height to his jumps, his ground pound for smashing enemies and obstacles, his gobble move for eating enemies and other objects to make eggs, and his egg toss for attacking enemies, triggering switches, and opening question mark clouds. Even the more advanced techniques, like the boosted flutter jump and ricocheted egg throw, are present and accounted for. Basically, if you've played Yoshi's Island before, you'll be very familiar with Yoshi's basic moveset. The health system also works exactly the same in Yoshi's New Island as it did in the original Yoshi's Island. Yoshi himself doesn't have a health gauge. Instead, if Yoshi gets hit by an enemy or an obstacle, Baby Mario will fall off of his back, and the star counter will start counting down, only stopping once Yoshi recovers Baby Mario. If the star counter gets to 0, Kamek's minions swoop in and capture Baby Mario, resulting in a lost life. Even the countdown pace is identical to that of the original Yoshi's Island, at about 1.5 stars per second. This is an interesting choice, given that the countdown timer in Yoshi's Island DS and the Game Boy Advance remake of Yoshi's Island is considerably slower, at 1 star per second, which makes it easier to maintain a higher amount of health. One small change in Yoshi's New Island compared to the original is in how the eggs themselves work. In Yoshi's Island, all eggs that Yoshi gets from egg boxes, eggplants, and gobbled enemies are green. The color of the eggs can be changed to yellow and red when they are ricocheted off of surfaces, which gives different rewards when thrown at an enemy depending on the color of the egg. Yellow eggs give 1 coin, and red eggs give 2 stars, which add points to the star counter. There are also some sparkly red eggs in some levels, which give a red coin after hitting an enemy. Yoshi's New Island largely conforms to this convention, right down to including the sparkly red eggs in a couple of levels. Where it differs, though, is in the way that you can get yellow and red eggs. On top of ricocheted eggs changing color, Yoshi also has a chance of getting yellow and red eggs out of egg boxes, eggplants, and gobbled enemies. On one hand, this is actually pretty cool, since it's easier to get more coins and recover star points when the game just gives you the yellow and red eggs instead of requiring a trick shot. On the other hand, the different colored eggs break after a certain number of bounces. Green eggs can ricochet twice, yellow eggs can ricochet once, and red eggs don't ricochet at all, breaking immediately after hitting any surface. So when you do need to ricochet the eggs for a trick shot, which is often required to collect certain items, you have to pay attention to what types of eggs you have, because you could end up wasting eggs if you don't. Of note is that Yoshi's New Island is the first game in the Yoshi series that allows you to throw multiple eggs in quick succession. This really comes in handy on enemies that require multiple eggs to beat, like the Claw Daddies and Pot Ghosts. It's a small touch, but it does make a difference in certain situations. I really appreciate this addition, and I'm glad that it carried over to later Yoshi games. As much as this game follows the Super Nintendo classic though, Yoshi's New Island does have some big additions and changes, the first of which you come across in the very first level, the Egg Dozers. Every once in a while, there will be a giant Shy Guy or a giant egg block that gives Yoshi an enormous egg. This egg can be thrown like a normal egg, but with a few caveats. Namely, taking this giant egg replaces all of the normal eggs that Yoshi is carrying, and trying to leave the area that the giant egg is found in will result in Yoshi dropping the egg. Yoshi aims and throws the Egg Dozer like a normal egg, and it'll also ricochet off of surfaces. True to its name though, this giant egg is a bulldozer, mowing down everything in its path when thrown, including enemies and breakable terrain. It'll also fill up an extra life counter, which gives you extra lives depending on how much destruction you cause. Basically, it's Yoshi's version of the Mega Mushroom in New Super Mario Bros. There's also a metal variant of the Egg Dozer in a few levels, most notably in water levels. It's much heavier than a standard Egg Dozer, so Yoshi can only roll it on the ground instead of launching it into the air. To make up for this limitation, Yoshi can use these eggs to walk at the bottom of water areas, although this isn't super logical, given the fact that Yoshi's not physically tethered to the metal Egg Dozer at all. Other than that, it's pretty much the same concept. Throw the giant egg to wreak havoc on enemies and terrain. I think the Egg Dozer is an interesting addition in that it presents some neat puzzles, and it's satisfying to completely wreck everything in the level with them. But there's a big problem. It's ultimately a throwaway mechanic. They're only present in a handful of levels, and when they are used, they're often limited to secluded areas that are focused on the mechanic. This essentially separates the Egg Dozers from the main gameplay and make them stand out like a sore thumb. This would be less of a problem if it wasn't presented as this game's big new innovation. It's a little tricky to spot, but if you look closely, you can see the giant egg that takes up half of the front of the box! Ultimately, the Egg Dozers are an interesting addition, but they're more of a distraction than they are a focus. And as fun as they are, I don't think that the mechanic improves the game in the slightest. It's also worth mentioning that Yoshi's Island had giant eggs too, but they're only in 1 or 2 levels, and act more as a supplement for the main gameplay rather than a replacement in the sections where they show up. Another big change in Yoshi's New Island is that the Superstar makes a return, which grants the power of invincibility and the ability to run up walls. But in this game, Yoshi gets the powers, not Baby Mario. It seems like most people dislike this change, but I don't really mind it, since, you know, this is a Yoshi game, not a Super Mario game. It just makes sense to me that Yoshi takes the active role instead of Baby Mario. There's also a new variant of the Superstar, which shows up at the end of every Superstar section. It grants Yoshi with a huge burst of speed and rockets him through a quick section with enemies, obstacles, and coins. These speed burst sections feel like an adrenaline rush, and even though they don't present much in the way of importance or collectibles, they're harmless fun as far as I'm concerned. The transformation sections also got an overhaul in this game. Instead of traditional controls, these sections are navigated primarily by tilting the system from side to side. I don't mind this all that much, but frankly, there's no reason these sections couldn't have worked perfectly fine with the standard buttons and control pad. It kinda just feels like the developers wanted to take advantage of the gyroscope simply because it's built into the 3DS. Also, these transformation sections take place in dedicated sub-areas, as opposed to being more seamlessly incorporated into the stage itself like Yoshi's Island and Yoshi's Island DS. It's a lot like Yoshi Topsy-Turvy in that way, where you get to the end of a normal section of the level, go into a door, transform into something crazy, then do a short challenge before you can move on to the rest of the level. This makes the transformations feel more like a fun little minigame than anything, and as a result of this modular nature, they feel like a disposable mechanic, even though they're not optional most of the time. And even though they're fun, being so segmented from the rest of the level makes these transformation sections feel tacked on, like they're only present in the game because they're a Yoshi staple. The last big change that Yoshi's New Island brings to the table is an easy mode. Well, it's more like an easy mode power-up, really. If you lose 3 lives in a level, a pipe character at the checkpoint spurts out a Flutterwing item, which you can choose to either collect or avoid. If you collect it, Yoshi is granted a pair of wings that replaces his flutter jump with an infinite hover ability. This is great for younger or less skilled players who are struggling to get through a level. But for those of us who have a little more gaming experience, it should probably just be ignored. And I do feel a little insulted whenever it appears. It doesn't really help that the game says, "You seem a tiny bit stuck. Try this. It should help you fly right through a level." I don't know. Get out of here. You seem a tiny bit stuck. Shut up, game. I know. I just suck. In fairness, this is a Yoshi game, and a relatively easy one at that, so it's definitely my fault when that message comes up. But I do think that having the Flutterwing appear after 3 deaths feels a bit aggressive. In my opinion, it would be better to spawn the Flutterwing after 5 deaths or something. There's also a golden Flutterwing that spawns if Yoshi dies while using the regular Flutterwings. In addition to granting him an infinite hover ability, the golden Flutterwing also makes Yoshi invulnerable to enemy attacks, though he can still die from falling down pits, touching lava or spikes, or getting crushed by stage obstacles. May as well have the gameplay itself at this point. Like I said, it's great for beginners, but for the rest of us, it really should be skipped. By the way, it's worth mentioning that this item doesn't show up in the unlockable, more difficult S levels, which definitely makes sense, given that the whole point of those levels is to be more difficult. On that note, let's talk about this game's worlds and levels. Like Yoshi's Island before it, Yoshi's New Island has 6 worlds with 8 levels apiece, along with 2 boss fights, a secret 9th level, and an unlockable bonus area. Really, there's not much of a difference between the world structures of the 2 games. It's pretty much identical, right down to the level themes of each of the 6 worlds. Yoshi starts his adventure running and jumping through the easygoing plains and spelunking in the crystal caves of World 1. He then crosses the canyons and hikes up the hills of World 2. The jungles of World 3 feature mischievous monkeys and towering Neppy Newts with plenty of vegetation and swamplands for Yoshi to trudge through. World 4 sees Yoshi continue his climb as he carefully navigates the windswept upper hills and cliffs, ending with his eventual ascent to the frozen mountaintops covered in snow, ice, and penguins in World 5. Finally, Yoshi reaches World 6, home to an active volcano, lava fields, magma-filled caverns, and Baby Bowser's domain. The level select music even incrementally adds more instruments and harmonies as you progress through the game, just like in Yoshi's Island. Like I said, it's all pretty much identical between the 2 games, with only a few small differences, one of which is the level select screen itself. The original Yoshi's Island has a 2D map screen that shows a winding path going from one level to the next. Each level is represented by a Yoshi with a number sign, illustrating the Yoshi relay system described in the game's intro cutscene. And as each level is unlocked, a preview thumbnail appears that gives an idea of what to expect in the level. There's even a cute little animation of Yoshi passing Baby Mario to the next Yoshi, waving to wish him good luck. This is a little detail, but I think it's a great touch, and it adds so much personality to the level select screen. By contrast, Yoshi's New Island features a full 3D model for the island, and the levels simply show up as colored dots. The level preview thumbnails are entirely absent, which I think is a bit silly considering there's plenty of room to show them on the touchscreen. But I do appreciate the island model, as the animated elements like the waterfalls, clouds, and volcano make the world feel alive. What doesn't feel alive on the level select screen is Yoshi himself, as he just blinks to the next level, foregoing the animation of passing off Baby Mario. Again, it was only a little touch in Yoshi's Island, but it made a big difference, and its absence in Yoshi's New Island is certainly a letdown. Also, as I mentioned before, each world in both Yoshi's Island on the SNES and Yoshi's Island on the 3DS contain 8 normal levels, 1 secret level, and 1 bonus area. However, Yoshi's Island DS and the Game Boy Advance port of Yoshi's Island both feature a second unlockable level in each world, dubbed the secret level. These are unlocked upon beating Bowser at the end of the game. In the case of Yoshi's Island GBA, these are some of the best levels the game has to offer, utilizing some of the game's lesser known tricks and mechanics. The secret levels in Yoshi's Island DS are admittedly a bit of a pain, but I appreciate that they're in the game regardless. These special levels added quite a bit of content to both games, and they also made it much easier to unlock the extra levels, which are unlocked by achieving 800 points in the associated world. In the case of Yoshi's Island on the SNES, this means 100% completing each level, as each level is worth 100 points. But in Yoshi's Island GBA and DS, you only need 800 out of a possible 900 points, which is a much more forgiving standard of completion. It's honestly kind of baffling that Yoshi's New Island took a step backward by leaving out these secret levels, and it really feels like it just does this to conform to the original Yoshi's Island even more. Regarding the levels themselves, I think they're well designed for the most part. The level design is a very similar concept to the original Yoshi's Island. Wait, hold up, I feel like a broken record right now. How many times have I said that Yoshi's New Island is very similar to the original Yoshi's Island? Well, that would explain it. Anyway, just like in Yoshi's Island, each level in Yoshi's New Island is a linear romp through a set of obstacles and puzzles to get to the end of the stage, with a plethora of secret areas and collectibles hidden throughout. Each level also has at least one middle ring, which acts as a checkpoint that you'll return to if you lose a life, and it also refills 10 star points to Yoshi's health meter. I really appreciate that the levels are designed in such a way that you can just blast through them without paying much mind to the extras if you're not very good at the game, want to play the game more casually, or if you just want to play a quick level or two while you're on the bus or something. At the same time, if you're looking for a little bit of added challenge, you can search for all of the collectibles and get the most out of every level. But like I said, this is exactly the same concept as the original Yoshi's Island, as well as most Yoshi games just in general. And honestly, there's not a lot of difference to be had here, since Yoshi's New Island follows the blueprints laid out by its predecessor to a T. Of note though are the length of the levels, the boss fights, and the difficulty curve. The levels in this game are quite short compared to the other games in the series, especially for the early levels, which shouldn't take more than 10 minutes to beat even if you're going for 100% completion. In one way, this is a refreshing change of pace, and it definitely complements the pick up and play nature of the game being on a handheld system. It also makes it less of a pain to replay the levels if you missed something, which I can't say for Yoshi's Island DS, but that's a topic for another day. On the other hand though, the levels are almost too short. It's not like Yoshi's Woolly World, where there's a brand new concept in each stage, so it's not like there's lost potential from the levels being so short, but it does feel like the levels could have been a little longer. The fortress at the midpoint of each world is occupied by Kamek, who acts as the mini-boss at each of these fortresses. Most people seem to think this is boring, and in fairness, it is a bit of a bummer that 6 of the game's 12 boss fights are repeat fights with Kamek, but honestly, I really like these fights. And while you are fighting Kamek 6 times throughout the game, each encounter with him is completely different, which really helps the fights not feel repetitive. Also, Yoshi can't damage Kamek directly with his normal attacks. Instead, you have to use the objects in the area to beat him, like balloons carrying grenades, or the spinning platforms with a set of spikes on one side. And the catch is that Kamek can use these to his advantage too. My favorite example of this is the arrow clouds, which Yoshi can use to ricochet egg throws in the direction that the arrow points. Kamek can also use these, blasting them with his magic to attack Yoshi in more unpredictable ways. I honestly really like that these fights are almost puzzle-like, and I think they're more interesting than most people give them credit for. Besides, given how powerful of a magician Kamek is portrayed to be, it's nice that we get to see him roll up his sleeves and take on Yoshi himself, rather than just getting his minions to do the dirty work for him. Of course, the main boss fights happen at the large castle at the end of each world. Just like most Yoshi games, the boss room has a normal enemy that Kamek supersizes with his magic, only in this game, he smashes them with a giant magic hammer. Oof, that's gotta hurt. Honestly, the fights themselves are fine for the most part, and I'd say they're pretty much on par with most of the boss fights in the other Yoshi games. They're all too easy, but this is typical for all Yoshi games, including Yoshi's Island. But, on a positive note, aside from Baby Bowser, none of the bosses are copied from the other games. They're all original boss characters, which is great, considering there's only 5 of these boss fights in total. That said, they're not all winners, and I find that they're pretty forgettable. I mean, with character picks like Big Beanie, I think that goes without saying, especially considering that the bean enemy only shows up in one level and never again. As for the difficulty curve, the game is pretty easy all the way up through World 5. Up until World 6, I thought Yoshi's New Island was just going to be an overall easier Yoshi game than the rest in the series. Though I will say that getting 100% completion in some of the levels in World 5 was more difficult, encouraging the use of some of the more advanced mechanics like the boosted flutter jump. But World 6 is where the rubber really hits the road. All of the levels in this world contain much more difficult platforming sections, even including some sections where the platforms quickly vanish behind you. The example that immediately comes to mind is near the end of level 6-1, where a chain chomp chases you down a stretch of destructible platforms, while requiring well-timed egg tosses to collect some tricky items. I was honestly shocked at how much more difficult the game got just in the final world. It's still not the most difficult Yoshi game or anything, but I appreciate the bump in difficulty, even if the ramp-up gave me a bit of whiplash. Now, being a Yoshi game, Yoshi's New Island puts a large focus on 100% completion, specifically around the various collectibles that the game has to offer. Just like the rest of the Yoshi's Island games, Yoshi's New Island features 3 primary objectives in each stage aside from getting to the end of the level: collecting all 5 smiley flowers, collecting all 20 red coins, and finishing the level with full health. Unlike the other Yoshi's Island games though, this game doesn't give you a score upon beating the level based on the collectibles you found and how much health you have when you finish the level. Instead, each objective has its own separate checkbox, and the objectives you cleared are saved after you finish the level. This means that if you didn't complete all of the objectives in the stage, all you have to do to get 100% completion is to play through the level again and fulfill the objectives you didn't quite accomplish in the last go-around. For example, if you didn't find all of the red coins, but you did find all the smiley flowers and finish the level with full health, you'll only need to find all of the red coins in a repeat playthrough to 100% complete the level. This is a huge change from the previous games, where you had to clear all of the objectives in one go to get a perfect score, and it's a change that I greatly appreciate, since it makes it much easier to go for full completion. Frankly, it makes it pretty tough to go back to the completion system used in the rest of the Yoshi's Island games. I should note though, that this was improved upon in Yoshi's Woolly World and Yoshi's Crafted World, where those games kept track of each individual collectible you found, rather than only keeping track of which objectives you've completed. To be more specific, let's say that you found 19 out of 20 red coins in a level. In Woolly World and Crafted World, you'd only need to find the one red coin that you missed in order to clear the red coin objective. By contrast, in Yoshi's New Island, you'd need to find all 20 red coins again. Like I said, New Island system is a marked improvement over the Yoshi's Island completion system, but it acts more as a stepping stone to the improved completion system of the following games. Still, Yoshi's New Island deserves a lot of credit for being the first Yoshi game to implement this major improvement. Something that New Island downgrades though is actually finding the collectibles. The original Yoshi's Island does have an overabundance of invisible question mark clouds hidden in each level, but most of the time these contain optional items such as regular coins, health refilling stars, and extra lives. The game seems to recognize that hiding smiley flowers and red coins in these invisible clouds is more of a pain than anything, and instead hides those items in more intuitive places that the keen-eyed player is more likely to discover through normal gameplay. The rest of the Yoshi games seem to have forgotten this important gameplay philosophy, and Yoshi's New Island is absolutely no exception. Red coins and smiley flowers are often hidden in invisible item clouds, many of which aren't even located where you're likely to uncover them without actively covering every square inch of the level. This by itself is a very unfortunate game design flaw that results in unnecessary repeat playthroughs of levels, but it gets even worse. Yoshi's New Island also implements a new way of uncovering red coins, walking over specific places in the level to make lines of coins spawn out of nowhere. I'd say this is even worse than the invisible question mark clouds, because at least with those, you know to be on the lookout for them. With this new mechanic, you might decide to run under a platform instead of jumping over it, and then a random line of coins containing 3 red coins will spawn out of nowhere. There's never any indication of these special spots, nor are they ever intuitive. And when you do find them, there's never an aha feeling or any sort of satisfaction. It feels more like a punch in the gut, especially if you replayed the level multiple times looking for just one red coin, then you randomly run over the exact right spot to make the red coin spawn. It can be downright infuriating. Here's a bit of an analogy. Finding the hidden items in Yoshi's Island is a lot like cleaning your living room, and you just so happen to find a random quarter hidden in the couch cushions. Well, that's a nice little bonus. In Yoshi's New Island, though, it's like losing the TV remote, and you have to scour every inch of your house until you find it on a whim.
Ah, there it is. Of course. Why didn't I think to check behind the refrigerator?
Another downgrade going from Yoshi's Island to Yoshi's New Island is the complete absence of assistive items that help you complete the game's optional objectives. Yoshi's Island rewards you with a minigame if you land on a smiley flower upon passing through the goal ring at the end of the level, These minigames offer you a chance to collect assistive items, which come in a variety of helpful effects. Specifically in regards to completion, there are two that I found to be extremely helpful: an instantaneous health refill, and an item that uncovers red coins and invisible question mark clouds. Yoshi's New Island completely abandons this mechanic. Just like Yoshi's Island, each level has a goal ring that gets populated with the smiley flowers you found in the level, and landing on a smiley flower results in something positive happening. But in Yoshi's New Island, instead of granting a minigame session, landing on a smiley flower gives you gold medals, the number of which corresponds to however many smiley flowers you found in the level. The assistive items from Yoshi's Island are nowhere to be found. And that's a real shame, because out of the two games, Yoshi's New Island would certainly benefit more from having an item that uncovers secrets and hidden items due to their less intuitive placement. I'm of the opinion that these optional assistive items were nothing but a good thing in Yoshi's Island, and even though including them would have technically made Yoshi's New Island easier, the invisible question mark clouds are nothing but an inconvenience for the player, and act as an artificial difficulty booster and a way to pad out the gameplay time, so I would have taken no issue with them being in this game. Also, those gold medals are a pain to collect. The goal is to collect 30 of them in each world, but only 7 of the 9 levels in the world, including the Secret S level, grant the opportunity to collect these medals, since the castles don't have an end goal ring. To make matters worse, collecting all 5 smiley flowers in a stage only grants a 50% chance of collecting any gold medals. So in order to get 30 gold medals without replaying any of the levels, you have to collect all 5 smiley flowers and land on the smiley flowers at the goal ring in at least 6 out of the 7 levels. There's only about a 2% chance of that happening, assuming you've collected all of the smiley flowers in every stage. That's an extraordinarily low percentage, but to be completely fair, in practice, you'll probably have to replay at least 1 or 2 levels in a world, so the chances are much higher that you won't have to play the levels again just for the gold medals. Next, finishing a level with full health is always a downright pain to accomplish in any of the Yoshi games, though the assistive health refill items in Yoshi's Island certainly help. Yoshi's Island DS got rid of these assistive items, which makes it a lot harder to achieve full health. However, in both of these games, if you lose a life after passing through a middle ring, you'll respawn with the same amount of health you had when you first passed through the middle ring. This means that if you took damage just before the end of the stage, you could sacrifice a life in order to respawn with more health instead of having to replay the entire level again just because of a single slip-up. This is especially helpful in the castle levels, where you can easily take damage from the boss. Not only does Yoshi's New Island not have assistive items to replenish health, it also reworked the middle ring health system. If you lose a life after passing through a middle ring, Yoshi will be left with only 10 out of 30 hit points when he respawns, regardless of how much he had upon passing through the middle ring. This makes getting full health an absolute chore, especially in the boss levels, and it entirely erases the advantage of sacrificing a life in order to have another go at full health. I mean, unless you want to try using trick shots to get back to full health, but that usually takes longer than just playing through the entire level again. So if you take damage just before the end of the stage, your best bet is usually to start the level again from the beginning, and that sucks. What bothers me even more is that this revamped checkpoint system has become the standard, not the exception, in the Yoshi games that followed New Island. It completely baffles me, because it's an inferior system with no benefit that I can think of. Both Yoshi's Woolly World and Yoshi's Crafted World even have an option to restart from the beginning of the level, nullifying the need to sacrifice a Yoshi, but this is rendered completely pointless by the fact that you'll have to start from the beginning of the level, and there's still no way to respawn with full health at a checkpoint. And the fact is that Yoshi's New Island is to blame for this purely negative change. I sincerely hope that any future Yoshi games go back to the old checkpoint health system. One last thing that makes the collectible experience more painful, even if only slightly so, is the fact that if a coin, health star, or smiley flower is all the way off the screen, it cannot be collected by an egg throw. This applies even if the item in question is off screen by a few mere pixels. In truth, this is more of a minor nuisance rather than a major problem, but there were at least a few instances in my playthrough where I would jump down a cliff to progress through the level, only to miss a few coins on my way down. I couldn't throw an egg to collect those coins, so I would just have to hope and pray that none of them were red coins. It's also just annoying to throw an egg expecting it to collect a smiley flower or a coin, only to come up empty-handed and having to backtrack in order to collect it. Alright, so the completion process has a few flaws, though in fairness, the same thing can be said for pretty much all of the Yoshi games, but they do tend to do a good job rewarding you for playing the game well, typically offering additional content that unlocks once you've achieved a certain level of completion, and Yoshi's New Island is no exception to this rule. So after you've combed through every level and found all of the hidden collectibles throughout, how does the game reward you for your efforts? First, simply finishing each world unlocks one multiplayer minigame that corresponds to each world, with a total of 6 different minigames. Personally, aside from collecting footage, I didn't play any of these minigames, as I didn't know anyone else with a copy of Yoshi's New Island, but they're a fine enough distraction from the main game. They seem to be loosely based on the minigame huts in Yoshi's Island and Yoshi's Island DS, which are action-type minigames involving popping balloons, tossing enemies into a large tulip, flutter jumping as far as possible, etc. However, unlike Yoshi's Island SNES and DS, these multiplayer minigames don't grant helpful items or extra lives. They're simply high score chasers. So while these minigames are a nice little feature to try out, there's not much here to reward the player or to keep them invested. Next, collecting 30 gold medals in a world unlocks the Transformation Challenge stage for that world, which takes the place of the minigames featured in each world in Yoshi's Island. These transformation challenges involve racing to the end of a short level and grabbing as many 1-ups as you can. These are good fun, and they're a good way to accumulate more lives, if you need them for some reason. I think I prefer the minigame approach of Yoshi's Island, though admittedly, this could be due to the rewards being more substantial and useful, rather than just being extra lives. Just like the mid-level and end-level minigames, the unlockable minigames in each of Yoshi's Island's worlds offer a chance to win the single-use assistive items. It's really nice to have the option to earn these items whenever you want, and I really miss them in the games they're not in, including Yoshi's New Island. Still, I can't fault the transformation challenges for not offering a reward that the game itself doesn't feature. They're a fine alternative to the minigames, even if I only ever played them once. Of course, the most substantial reward for completion is the secret 9th level in each world, the S levels. These are unlocked once you've finished every level with full health, all 20 red coins, and all 5 smiley flowers. The S levels are much more challenging levels that will absolutely test your skills and patience. In my opinion, they tend to be more difficult than the secret levels in Yoshi's Island SNES, but not necessarily in a good way. Level 1S is the easiest out of the bunch, featuring moving rail lift type platforms, but it's still difficult enough to be satisfying to complete. Levels 2S, 3S, and 4S are auto-scrolling levels in a sense, requiring you to stand on some moving platform and navigate the stationary obstacles. These ones are pretty frustrating, as being auto-scrolling levels with the difficulty of a standard Yoshi S level requires perfect jumps and egg toss timings. It took me a very long time to beat them, let alone 100% complete them. Level 5S is easily the most frustrating, being a vertical shaft that you have to navigate by bouncing off of bullet bills, and any slip-ups will send you careening back to the bottom. And finally, level 6S is the most difficult out of all of them, being a collection of tightly timed platform challenges with very little margin for error. Even though it's the most difficult one with some frustrating sections, it's still the one I enjoyed the most, and it was a great way to wrap up the game. Just like in other Yoshi games, I think the S levels are an awesome reward for completing the other levels. Having one S level per world spreads out the challenge throughout the whole game, which is a great way of providing more skilled players a greater challenge than the normal levels offer. I definitely prefer this approach over the system introduced in Yoshi's Crafted World, where the challenging levels are saved until the end of the game, meaning any semblance of challenge is reserved for the post-game content. All in all, I'd say that Yoshi's New Island does a good job rewarding you for undertaking all of the optional objectives, which makes the struggle for 100% completing the game worth it in the end. Speaking of the end, it's finally time to take on the last level. After battling through the lava-scorched fields and rocky slopes of Egg Island's volcano, Yoshi uncovers the pathway to Baby Bowser's castle, which for some reason is in a dimensional rift or something like that in the ocean. No wonder the Yoshis couldn't find it before. But anyway, this castle is quite similar to the one in the original Yoshi's Island, starting with a bottomless pit with a Kamek chase, then a section with 4 rooms that leads to the corridor to Baby Bowser's throne room. Notably, the corridor section is basically identical to the one in Yoshi's Island, being an auto-scrolling section that features a bunch of blocks that Kamek can transform into enemies or items as a desperate last attempt to block Yoshi's approach. Kamek fails, of course, and Yoshi heads into the throne room to confront Baby Bowser. From here, the story plays out exactly the same as it does in Yoshi's Island, right down to having nearly identical dialogue.
That green donkey looks strangely familiar.
Wait, what did you call me, punk? Yoshi promptly defeats him, then Kamek supersizes him as a last resort, and Yoshi faces off against the giant Baby Bowser. Yoshi defeats him again, and having run out of options, Kamek and Baby Bowser retreat, and Yoshi saves Baby Luigi and the stork, just like he does in Yoshi's Island. However, suddenly warping through space and time, King Bowser appears!
Excuse me, what?
Out of nowhere, Bowser from the future shows up to confront Yoshi, and this is the most atrocious Deus Ex Machina story beat of the entire franchise. Like, why is he here? How did he even get here? And why am I wasting brain cells questioning it? Anyway, regardless of all that hullabaloo, this plays out exactly the same way as it did before, with Yoshi beating Bowser, Kamek supersizing him, and Yoshi facing off against Giant Bowser again. The interesting thing about this boss battle, though, is that it happens after the level clear screen and after the cleared objectives have been checked off. Yoshi's health counter is even reset to 10 for the final boss fight. This might seem like it would make the fight with Bowser more difficult, but counterintuitively, it actually makes it easier. You can't get full health in this boss fight, and there's no bonus objectives to go for after you defeat Baby Bowser, so it doesn't matter at all if you get hit. As long as you catch Baby Mario before the star counter goes to 0, you're golden. Even with Kamek flying around the screen and the very few new attacks from Bowser, this boss fight is inconsequential at best and a complete and utter waste of time at worst. And here's the kicker. This is technically the good ending. If you use the Flutterwing item to help you beat any of the levels, the end credits will play after you defeat Baby Bowser, but Bowser will just show up at the end screen anyway, telling you that if you want to beat him, and ultimately the game, you have to go back and beat the levels without using the Flutterwing, then play the final level again. Honestly, I think the final fight with Bowser is already pretty stupid, but being gated off by this requirement only serves to make it even worse. Calling it a completion reward would be too charitable. It's just a punishment for sucking at the game. Talk about adding insult to injury. Anyway, after you defeat Bowser, he disappears, presumably going back to the future he came from, and Kamek is nowhere to be seen. Now that the stork and Baby Luigi have been rescued, for real this time, the stork sets off to deliver the Baby Mario Bros to their parents, exactly the same as in the original Yoshi's Island. As the stork flies over the mountains towards Mario and Luigi's parents, the end credits roll. The music that plays here starts off sounding relaxing, gently lulling you into a peaceful daze with a slow-tempoed piano and some string instruments backing it up in a quite pleasant melody. That is, until the song crescendos to its dynamic build-up, and the string instruments are replaced with the awful kazoos and squeaks. Oh, come on! The kazoos? You had some good music going, guys! Why would you add kazoos into this? Are you kidding me? Whose idea was that? Are you serious? The credits honestly felt really nice for a minute there. And then they brought in the kazoos. Why? This ruins the entire feel of the song, and destroys whatever feeling of triumph remained after the final boss fight. With any feeling of sincerity thrown out the window, the credits end with the stork dropping the babies off at a mushroom house, safely delivering the Mario Bros to their parents. And as an added bonus, there's one last cutscene that shows the pipe character that offered the Flutterwing and other helpful items throughout the game was really Mario from the future the whole time. At this point, sure, why not? I think even the game itself knows this is a terrible way to wrap things up. Just look at the bottom screen. The end.
Jeez, don't sound too excited, game.
I really wanted to give the story a fair chance, but in the end, it absolutely disappointed me, and it's really unfortunate that it had to end this way.
Well, that wraps up Yoshi's New Island, and honestly, I'm really glad that I replayed it, because after giving it a second chance, I've come away with some new thoughts about the game. So, is Yoshi's New Island really that bad? Well, no, it's not. But also, yes, it is.
I used to think that gameplay was the only thing that truly mattered in a video game. And in fairness, the gameplay is the factor that sets video games apart from other media, like movies and books. Because of this, I still think that the gameplay is the most important factor in a video game. But over the past few years especially, I've come to understand that the other aspects of a video game really do matter, and Yoshi's New Island is a masterclass example of just how important these other aspects are. At its core, Yoshi's New Island is very much a game in the vein of the original Yoshi's Island. The gameplay, level design, and completion experience are all pretty solid, at least half as good as the original Yoshi's Island, which is honestly pretty high praise. But unfortunately for Yoshi's New Island, these are only a part of the whole experience, and the rest of the game is what really drags it down. The art style isn't completely atrocious, but it doesn't compare to the other games in the series. The story is basically a copy-paste of the original Yoshi's Island, with a twist ending that makes the game feel more like a parody than a proper sequel. And while the soundtrack is honestly better than I think most of us give it credit for, there are absolutely some ear-wrenching songs that stick out like a sore thumb. I think the main issue with Yoshi's New Island isn't that it's a bad game. In fact, despite its flaws, I think it's actually pretty good. The problem isn't that the game has issues, it's that it's bookended by them. The moment the title screen is loaded, you're greeted with the worst music in the game. Each level ends with a barrage of kazoos instead of a triumphant song that instills a sense of accomplishment. And the game ends with a cringe-worthy story twist and a final credit theme that starts out being pleasant, but turns into a kazoo-filled cacophony. No matter how good the moment-to-moment gameplay might be, Yoshi's New Island is most remembered by the first and last impressions, which are honestly pretty terrible. That said, if you've written off Yoshi's New Island due to criticisms about the music and the story, I'd recommend that you'd at least give it a try for yourself. There's a decent chance that you'll dislike the music and story so much that you still won't be won over by the gameplay. Frankly, that seems to be the case for most people. But at the very least, Yoshi's New Island should be appreciated for introducing many of the quality of life features that we enjoy in the later Yoshi games. And if you can get past the music and ignore the story, I truly think that it's a game worth experiencing.
So what do you think? Is Yoshi's New Island really as bad as most people say? If you haven't played the game before, do you think you might want to try it out? And if you've tried it before and given up on it, do you think you'd be willing to give the game a second chance? Let me know in the comments below. Now if you'll excuse me, I'm really tired now. I think I'll go to sleep. Ugh, never mind.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe so you'll be notified when I make more videos like this. Also, I post updates and chat with the fans in my Discord server, so feel free to join. Thanks again for watching. See you next time.